June 6, 1944. History was being made. At Normandy, the Allies taking another step on the road toward liberating Europe from tyranny. History was also being made in South Carolina. GF2, a B25C Mitchell bomber flying out of Greenville Army Air Base, was forced to ditch in Lake Greenwood. Dan Rossman was the left-seat pilot that day. Rossman would go on to serve with honor in the Pacific before the conclusion of World War II. In later years, GF2 would be rescued from her watery tomb and restoration work started. Dan is no longer with us. He passed away in 2014, but years earlier, he recorded his memories of an earlier time. Colonel Dan Rossman remembers.
Now the time came to go to Greenville. By now you know the routine. Back up, on the trucks, down to the railroad siding, on the train, for the relatively short ride to Greenville. I believe I arrived at Greenville on the 21st of May, 1944. One of the first acts after getting established in the BOQ was to form up a crew. Pilots, navigator bombardiers. These were a kind of new breed in the Air Force. The Air Force had been training navigators and bombardiers, but for airplanes like the B-25, where you couldn't afford the extra crew positions, they were training navigator bombardiers. And these were people that could do both functions. And Dick Shave, who was our navigator bombardier, was really good at it. We're all put in a room, all the crew positions: pilots, navigator bombardiers, flight engineers, radio men, and gunners. So now we get to June the 6th, 1944, famous in history as D-Day. I got permission. I was scheduled to fly that afternoon, and so I got permission to miss some ground school that morning. I got down to fly at Flightline, and that day I was scheduled with Blackie Wallace, who was another student pilot, for emergency procedures, which is single engine training. In other words, the problem with flying, there's no problem flying a twin engine airplane. It's just like a single engine airplane until you lose an engine. Then things get to be a problem because you got asymmetrical thrust. The airplane wants to pull into the dead engine because it's got more power on one side than the other. And to this day, I swear I never saw the name Skunky on that airplane. I do remember that the airplane was kind of pinkish in color, and I thought that it must have been one of the airplanes that had been over with the 9th or 15th Air Force or 12th, whatever it was, in North Africa. Now the identifying marks on that airplane were in large letters GF2, and that marking system derived from the RAF system. What that stood for was Greenville, F for Fox Squadron, just F Squadron, number 2 airplane. And so we climbed onto the airplane and started out, and Blackie Wallace was in the left seat. And we flew down to an auxiliary airfield, a place called Greenwood, South Carolina. And I think the airfield had I think the base had a name like Coronacca Auxiliary Army Airfield or whatever it was. It was one of the auxiliary fields you use, so it's not the cluttered traffic at the home base at Greenville. And we spent about 2 hours or so. Blackie was in the left seat and continually doing single engines. And then it came about 2 o'clock, it came to be my turn in the seat, so I got into the seat and went through the same routine. I guess we've been at it about an hour or so when the instructor, Lieutenant Jackson, decided he'd had enough. He said, well, I've had enough of this and you guys have had enough also. Here, he said, let me show you what's going to happen when you get overseas. Have you ever done any low flying? I said, no, sir. You want to do some? Oh, yes, sir. You know, I've said all along that I was kind of a willing participant in what happened afterwards. So away we went. We wound up at about 4:30 in the afternoon, after this had been going on about a half hour, 45 minutes or whatever, coming down Lake Greenwood. I remember us overflying an island, and it wasn't until about 1995 or so that I found out that that island figured in a story that developed later on about why we were flying so low. That story had to do with we were buzzing bathing beauties, and I'd said all along that bathing beauties had nothing to do with it. It was just a straight, low flying. It turned out there were a couple of women on that island sunbathing, and we overflew them, and that's apparently what started that story. But anyway, we're coming down the lake now. Lake Greenwood is a rather large lake, long, wide, but relatively calm. It means there are no breakers as you see in the ocean. which makes it literally impossible to judge your altitude over the water within 20 or 30 feet. We were coming down the lake, and I remember seeing off to my left a man standing up in a boat fishing. And I remember thinking, we're eye to eye, and if we're eye to eye, we're too low. At which point, the instructor said, too low, and just tapped the wheel on me, and the props went in. At which point, he said, I've got it, it's my airplane. And he did what I believe was a high-speed stall. We just horsed back the stick. The tail hit the water. Airplane just kind of nosed up for a bit and then nosed straight in, and in we went. Seems to me that what happened was my seatbelt opened or tore loose. The fitting tore loose. But I came out of that seat and hit that wheel. I remember moving, and then I don't remember much after that until two things happened. I remember feeling something hit my head, and what that something that hit my head was Blackie Wallace going out of the airplane. Blackie Wallace has a gash 3 or 4 inches long in his cheek, and I can see his teeth through it. He had been lying back on the navigator's desk behind the cockpit listening to reports about D-Day on low-frequency radio, and the thump I felt was him coming forward. How he survived that, I don't know. He wasn't strapped in. The instructor swam over to me and said, look, I'm going to take the engineer and go ashore, see if I can get some help. Look after Wallace. He's hurt. After a bit, I saw a little motorboat coming out, and there were 2 men in that motorboat, and they pulled over, and they pulled up to me first, and the guy in the front of the boat, bow, leaned over and showed me an AGO, Adjutant General's office pass, and introduced himself as a Lieutenant Colonel in the South Carolina National Guard. At that point, I thought, I don't care who you are, just get us out of here. They hauled us up onto the end of the boat and took us ashore where a large number of people were gathered, and somebody said Greenville had called. They had talked to Greenville Army Air Force, whatever it was, and there was an ambulance. Somebody was coming down for us, but in the meantime they were going to take us to the Greenwood Hospital for some treatment. And I told the doctor to take Blackie first because he's hurt bad, and he handed me some bandage pads. I wondered, why is he doing that? I mean, my face feels funny, but I wonder why he's doing that. I guess I was in shock, didn't realize I was hurt. And I went over and looked in a mirror and nearly passed out. With my mouth shut, I could see my teeth. So I just put the pads there and kept them there and rode. Then the ambulance showed up and we rode back to Greenville. At Greenville, they took us into the dispensary. And the doctor that took care of me was a medical OD, medical officer of the day. And he was quite thrilled about the fact he was going to get to do stitching because it had been about 20 years since he put stitches in anybody. At any rate, they gave me some shots of Novocaine, and he started the stitching. And about the third time he put that needle in the first time, I realized that Novocaine wasn't holding, and I kept trying to tell him. I kept trying to get off the table, and the corpsman who was helping him pushed me down and kept saying, take it easy, Lieutenant. And I got very upset with him, and I told him if he'd get on the table, I'd stick him with the needle, and I could tell him to take it easy. The problem was the Novocaine wasn't really doing what it was supposed to do, and they didn't know it, but I did. He put 18 stitches in the outside, and he put 6 stitches on the inside to pull that right lip together. And then he ran out of sutures. He only had 24 sutures. And he sent the corpsman to go get some more out of supply, and then he said, I guess that'll hold. And he said to me, I guess you've had enough also. And whatever. After a while, they put me in a private room with an MP outside. And I asked the MP why he was there, and he said, to make sure you don't talk to anybody and nobody talks to you. I've had some very high moments in my life, and I've had some very low moments in my life, and I don't think I ever had a lower moment than that. I could just see myself home in disgrace.
The outcome of the courts-martial. Lieutenant Jackson was stripped of his aeronautical rating, stripped of his commission, dishonorably discharged, and instructed to report to his draft board to be re-enlisted as a corporal in the Army. I fared much better. Apparently, somebody must have intervened and decided that the country had not yet recovered its large investment in me since I hadn't been to combat. So I would be allowed to continue. I was fined $75 for conduct unbecoming an officer. I was also reprimanded for not preventing the willful destruction of government property. I was required to take what was called pecuniary liability for the airplane. In fact, some months later while I was overseas, the paperwork caught up with me, and I signed it took responsibility for a $555,000 airplane. It was also the judgment of the court that a notation be made in my permanent 201 file, as it was called, my personnel record, that I was never to be considered as eligible for a commission in the regular Air Force. I had occasion many years later to check my records at Denver, where records for all reservists are kept, and there was no such notation in the record.